It's good to see everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Ryan Erb. For those of you who don't know, I am the Executive Director of the United Way here in Perth-Huron, and so honored to be joined by many great people from across our region today for this important report back event that we have ongoing. So I know people will be chiming in, but we want to make sure that we keep to our schedule, so we're going to dive right in. We here at the United Way have been trying to address social issues. That's our job for as long as we can remember. These unignorable issues that we talk about, whether it's homelessness, isolation, mental health, addictions, transportation, the list goes on. And I know many of you on the call are involved in trying to work at these issues as well. But we try to be here to ensure that we can help as many people in our community as is possible in as many different ways. And it requires in Herculean efforts sometimes to do things differently than we've done in the past. And we recognize that there are some significant challenges, especially with housing and access to services in our region. And we've been wondering for some time, what more can we do in our community? What can we partner together with? How can we look at things differently than perhaps we have in the past? And so today, I'm pleased to let you know that we've got a great report back event happening on phase 2 of our feasibility and now business case study around what we are calling the Community Renewal Corporation. Really what we're after here is a way to create community competency to develop capital projects without explicit dependence on grants. That's key to this, we need more competency to develop capital projects in our community if we're going to address some of these social issues that are facing us. And I'm excited today to let you know that the Board of Governors at the United Way received this report recently, about 2 weeks ago. And in that reception of the report, they have chosen to support the incubation of this project, this community renewal project going forward. That's a big deal. It's a bit of a scary step and a risk for our organization, but we are interested to try to move this forward. We'll see how that goes. Lots of partnerships to be further developed. It'll take a team. It's not just about the United Way, that is for sure. We're going to need everyone's help to try to move forward with this project. But we're going to dive in deeper today. And we have our fantastic consultants here from Impact Consulting. And so I'm going to turn it over to Andre, the author of the wonderful music. I don't know if he wrote the song, but at least he inserted the music for us to enjoy. And Nick as well. And they're going to introduce themselves, run through a slide deck today. When we're done with the slide deck, there will, of course, be opportunity for us to engage with the consultants and myself and others who have been involved in the project to discuss where we're at. We will have this event recorded. Well, I think you know that by joining. It has been recorded. It will be uploaded to our website along with the report and the slide deck from today. So if you know of someone who was unable to be with us, they will have opportunity to have a look at that material post-event. Probably give us a couple days to get that organized, maybe till Monday of next week. But we are looking forward to sharing out the information a little bit further. And special thanks to our friends who joined us in the second phase of this project as members of our steering committee. We really enjoyed getting advice from so many folks, and that'll be presented further. But my thanks to all of you who helped us to move forward with this project. So with that, Andre and Nick, I want to let you guys kick it off.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everyone, for welcoming us back to this community report back meeting. We did the first one with the feasibility study, and we had a great team of focus group members. And then, as Ryan mentioned, a great working group on the second phase for the business case. So many of you are familiar people to us, so it's so good to see familiar faces again. And for those of you that we're meeting for the first time, it's wonderful to meet you. We've come to, I know you call us a consultant, but we really feel like collaborators in this project with the United Way, and we are looking forward to taking the next step together in terms of moving forward on the implementation. So we are going to present to you our case for this community renewal company. Some of the slides will have some text on it. Some of them will be images. This deck will be presented back to you with the case, with the full case, as well as Ryan mentioned. And with that, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Nick, to kick us off. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
Hello, hello. Happy Thursday. My name is Nick van der Velde. I'm part of the consulting team with Andre Verschiest. It's a real honor to be here in front of you today. And we have an exciting presentation prepared for you that will report back all the work that we've done in phase 2 with United Way, a working group, and the aspirations that we hold in taking an additional step. Now, the presentation, where we're going to start, and as my colleague Andre is going to pull up the presentation, we are going to indicate to you the work that we did in phase 1, the feasibility study. And one of the key pieces that we wanted to explore was the why. why should we be doing this? And can we validate trends or challenges or complexities in the systems at the local level that we are experiencing or that our client demographics are experiencing? And then the second phase of this presentation, but also our work, indicates the how. And this is where the business case comes in. And so we're excited to share this with you, and I'll ask Andre to go to the next slide. So as I said, my name is Nick Vandervelde. I'm part of the Impact Consulting team by Pillar Nonprofit Network. We are a London, Ontario-based nonprofit organization. We have a significant network of nonprofits that we provide all types of services and access to. We're very honored to be part of this project, and I'll pass it off to Andre just for a quick second so he can provide a bit of an intro by himself.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Yeah, so I come with the background. Nick has a great housing background, finance. I come with the kind of community development and some of the social innovation background. And with Pillar, we've worked on developing community bonds, co-working spaces, and a network of organizations that have received investments, community capital investments, built up social enterprises, and support our nonprofit charity sector as we continue to face many challenges. And we're just glad and proud to be part of different initiatives that continue to look at ways to find different solutions to these common problems that we're all facing. So yeah, thanks, Nick.
Yeah, let's jump into the next slide. So during the feasibility study stage, phase one of our work together, we went into the community both from a secondary research perspective, reading studies, other business cases, other reports, but also primary research, actually talking to folks in the local communities, whether they were leaders of organizations or just community residents and community residents. And Andre and I, in addition, are very privileged to do work across Ontario. And so across Ontario, we see different trends emerge when it comes to the local ecosystem, especially pertaining housing. And then we can also correlate some of these trends happening in your community in Perth and Huron region. And so when you look at the slide, there's a few different trends that we can acknowledge and that we witness. We see that there's a rise in housing costs in both rental and ownership stock. And this is continued to rapidly appreciate year over year. We see a rise in applications of rent geared to income housing, which also continues to grow year over year. One of the particular things that we found interesting about your community is that we are seeing a decreased availability of rental units in Southern Ontario, but particularly pertaining to your local regions. And that's because of the migration that's happening from other regions, such as the Greater Toronto Area, and just overall immigration, at least pre-COVID. We see a resulting housing, results in a shrinking housing supply. And CMHC, the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, indicates that healthy vacancy levels in a community are typically around 3%. And so that basically indicates the flow of households between assets or the general availability of assets in the community. But we find that some communities, and I'm naming Stratford as an example, as of October 2020, had a vacancy rate of 1.6%. And very likely we estimate that it has even shrunk more coming into the year of 2021. We also noticed that regional long-term strategies for achieving new affordable housing seem to be inadequate for meeting current and future projected demands. And the last part is that there has been a very limited supply of new affordable housing units built in the last decade compared to demographic changes of your local region, but also the emerging needs. So the next slide will talk about the systems challenges related to that. So oftentimes in communities, we can see trends as the trends that I just mentioned to you. And we want to ask ourselves, why is this happening? And before I jump into that, I'm going to talk to you about the access to services. So one of the parts of our study was to look at the housing ecosystem and any type of challenges pertaining to housing. And the other side was really the access to services. And so we noticed, based on the research that we did, that many studies and other research projects indicated that geographic isolation impacts rural communities. Residents claim to experience gaps in social and health service delivery, and that the service delivery was either inconsistent, it was unpredictable, or absent altogether. And oftentimes this created extended commuting times to access either social or health services. There's also an indication that the community is experiencing increased mental health challenges. And one of the examples that we found in a study is that Huron County OPP is experiencing a 50% increase of calls related to mental health since 2014. And there were various studies that we found that COVID-19, the pandemic, has had many impacts on the local ecosystem, so how it delivers services, but also on the individual mental health of community residents. So systematically, the studies that we had access to and the conversations that we've had in the community indicates that the systems related to mental health and addiction experience friction overall and challenges revolving, the following components: wait times, barriers to access, fragmentation of service delivery, funding models that are not equipped or aligned with the current needs of programs, and then an uneven quality of the service delivery, and also a lack of data. And so in the next slide that Honor is going to pull up, we're looking at kind of the systems challenges for that. And the system challenges for the two sections and trends that I just talked to are as follows. We noticed that municipalities and social housing corporations oftentimes have the knowledge and the resources to advance large capital projects, but find themselves with limited staff capacity, limited resources, and instead, which is a great thing to do, is to focus on the current units and housing assets that they have. We also understand that when the federal government or even provincial government comes out with a funding program that pertains to housing or potentially community health or social services or community hubs, is that the funding, timing of the funding and the timing of available capital doesn't align with the project needs. And so if you do not have a shovel in the ground and have a project ready to go, typically the funding that comes out is misaligned. Especially in rural communities, we find that residential developers tend to pass on affordable housing projects. They find that the economies of scale are too small because they can't build very large, significant projects, and that the financial margins in those projects are not attractive enough. Now we're in a low interest rate environment, and so to borrow money is fairly cheap. And so builders know that because borrowing is cheap and because rising rental rates and decreased vacancy rates are apparent and are a real trend in our community, they can really afford to build luxury housing projects with lower risk. They know that they can fill those luxury housing projects, and then the returns on investment are more attractive. And so it seems, based on our research and our opinion, that there's little market incentive to build affordable rental projects by commercial developers or housing developers. And so all the trends that we just noticed really puts forward a call to action. And the call to action is that community champions are called for to intervene and create creative solutions to catalyzing construction of new affordable rental supply, address the rising challenges of the housing ecosystem, and accompany community to design, implement, and operate sustainable housing solutions. In short, we've developed a problem statement during the feasibility study stage that Andre will indicate. And there's really three statements that we have as it concerns housing priorities and human service priorities, and that there's one, a real need to develop a new significant amount of affordable rental supply in both Huron and Perth County. Two, supportive housing is needed as identified by local nonprofit agencies to support the most vulnerable in our communities. And three, innovative social service access model is required to mitigate the social service and health service delivery gap that seems to exist in both communities. Now, to remind you again why we're moving forward on the Community Renewal Company and why this is in particularly important and the reasoning behind us moving forward, I'll pass it off to my colleague Andre, who's going to talk about the community feasibility assessments that we performed.
Thanks, Nick. And so the United Way asked us to do research on the Community Development Corporation model that is pretty prevalent in the US through policy environments and financial structures. Also has been proliferated slightly in the context of Canada. We looked at examples in Edmonton and Nova Scotia, but also there's a whole movement around social enterprise, social finance, social innovation in our community that's trying to challenge the status quo, as Nick was mentioning, that some of the market incentives aren't there. And in our research, we looked at this model and we brought this model back into communities. So many of you were on these feasibility calls that we talked about. What could a community development corporation look like within the Perth-Huron context? And here's some of the feedback that we got from the community that allowed us to understand if this was a business case worth moving forward on. And so what was present in the community need is that obviously there's critical issues, many task force and working groups, and a lot of previous efforts to develop solutions. But what was lacking was a clear narrative for a broader community participation in these solutions, limited resources, and lack of a working group working across Perth and Huron regions. What was present is there's a few people in the organizations that are trusted in the region, obviously United Way was able to be one of the facilitators and conveners of this conversation with many others. There are a lot of collaborative community projects, but there was a lack of opportunity to get capital, to mobilize some operations and land through key partnerships. What was available was there was innovative financing mechanisms that were identified in different communities that could be brought to Perth and Huron. The municipalities were willing to be a funder and land partner in some situations, and the local CFTCs were willing to provide financing. But the focus groups did show that the local government did still have resource limitations. Attempts to attract capital was unsuccessful, and local stakeholders didn't want to compete with each other for more funding. From an incubation point of view, because in our studies we realized there's a need for incubating these models. United Way was identified as a possible incubator, and the focus groups acknowledged the need for a CDC to operate across both Perth and Huron counties, but there was no working group for this group, no staff lead allocated, and there's still needed for broad community support, which is why we do presentations like this. And finally, making sure there's the right team. The community pointed to a lot of builders externally, the curiosity in leveraging these competencies, as Ryan mentioned, locally, and there's a gap in who's going to build these partnerships and who's going to attract the right talent. So these are some of the things that were missing and were present. And with this context, there's enough here to move forward. And so we came up with the concept of the community renewal company as a result of this, because the word development wasn't hitting home in the community. And so we leveraged the word community renewal. And so the mission statement that we worked through to develop this business case was the CRC would facilitate and activate place-based community renewal projects through multi-sector partnerships that accelerate local access to affordable housing and social service providers in the Perth and Huron regions, for all the reasons that Nick described, and really filling that void in the development of high need projects in our community. And the CRC is taking that risk to take on the efforts of financing and delivering on these projects. So now we're going to go into the business case and tell you more about what we came up with. And the purpose of this business case is not only for this presentation, but to also build broader support in our community, build out partnerships, address the understanding around this common challenges and the communications around these common challenges, and really articulate a solution that can work for the community. So here's some other friendly faces. Some of you are on the call. We want to thank the working group members. Again, we just want to put the faces to the work. And we also had some external people come forward too. We'll talk about New Path Foundation later, but we had other people who had been involved in organizations that had done similar work also join our working group. And this team comprises of people that have background in municipal government, architecture, development and construction, banking and financing, philanthropy, and local social services. And so it's really great breadth and depth of feedback for this model. And what we were trying to understand was which approach to take to develop a community renewal company. And there were three options that we had developed. So one was to develop a standalone organization. So in option A, that would be high cost, high local collaboration, decreased bureaucracy, access to diverse revenues, access to non-traditional funding, and a bit slower moving to start something and build something from scratch because it didn't have a lot of track record. Option B was a bit of increased bureaucracy because you'd be using an existing organization. There'd be centralized leadership within an organization. It is less expensive than Model A. You still have access to non-traditional funding, but there could be some perceived risk and associated negative optics with an existing organization taking on this role in the community. That's just a possibility. And option C was, again, attracting those external stakeholders, lower collaboration, more cost effective, but you get less direct management and risk alignment on values and community needs. So these are the three options that we worked through. And the one that we decided to recommend to this community was to go with Model B. And for the reasons we described. So one, that this model could allow us to still reach mission alignment, allows an organization that has incubation expertise to take on that role within the community, that there are organizations locally that have the ability to manage assets, to cost effectively scale, to take on this type of liability and risk, to look at ways of mobilizing community support, and can work as a team internally and externally. And we did a review of the local landscape, including community futures development corporations, community foundations, housing providers, people that are on this call representing those organizations. And as a result of that review, we made the following recommendation: that the United Way Perth-Huron become the incubation partner. And Ryan indicated at the beginning of the call that was approved by the board. And here are the reasons that we provided that would be a good approach. So on the mission alignment, United Way Perth-Huron has been around for a long time and has a really great track record in mission alignment to the goals of the CRC. From an incubation experience, United Way Perth-Huron did incubate the Community Food Center. From an asset management point of view, there's an existing balance sheet, which is important if you want to leverage that to gain access to financing, including other cashes, pledges received, access to land, building, various office equipment that can be leveraged. Cost-effective scaling, United Way has demonstrated great operational excellence in consistency fundraising with grants, donations, and other consistent operational funding. There's a willingness by the United Way team to take on the liability and risk of the CRC. And there's also great community support to mobilize around this model, which we saw in time and time again in the focus groups, working groups in today's call. And there is a willingness to fund a position to take on some of this leadership role for the CRC moving into the fall. And again, folks on the calls that we're a part of were in support of the United Way taking on this role. So these are the reasons why we felt it was a good choice for United Way to take on this responsibility. So now that we've kind of laid the groundwork, what could the model look like for the CRC? And so looking at the projects that were in scope for the CRC, there was kind of 4 major categories of services that the CRC could be providing. From top right there, you have support, which is providing support to services to groups leading development of projects. On the bottom right, you have management, which operates the finalized projects. On the top left, you have convening, which is bringing together the stakeholders. And the bottom left, you have development of moving projects across the concept design, due diligence, development, and construction phases. And we see that the 2 on the left kind of being the major ones in the short term, moving forward for the CRC, and the 2 on the right being a little bit more long-term as the CRC is able to, gain some ground in the community, supporting other organizations and eventually managing or helping manage certain projects. And the impact model we see around this is, that if we're able to increase affordable housing units, increase access to social services, then in the short term, that people have access to those, and in the long term, that can help provide better, standard of living for the community members, which I think feels pretty obvious. And the way that this model will roll out is in 3 phases. So there's a startup phase that will move from a business case, which is where we're at today, towards implementation, which is in the next year. The next stage, we'll look at the incubation, which is what the United Way has said it will willing to do for a period of 1 to 3 years, see what's working, what's not working, a lot of iterative and learnings. And then finally, once the incubation phase is completed and there's a certainty that the CRC wants to move forward beyond this incubation phase, then a decision has to be made around, will it continue as a program of United Way? Will it become something on a standalone? Is there a hybrid model in between that allows for the United Way, for the CRC to thrive? And so what I want to kind of close off with you and share with you before you talk about some of the projects that the CRC could be involved in is thinking about, okay, what does a startup phase look like? So we're looking at, communicating this CRC model, the community renewal entity, company, organization out into the community, making sure that we can amplify existing advisory committees and create new ones as needed for particular projects or communities, that we are able to cultivate that community support and partnership support, that we would look at hiring someone to come on board for the CRC. So we have a draft job description we created that'll be finalized and hire that person. From the project development side, we have a model that we've developed that we'll show you that helps prioritize projects and property opportunities, structure the financial models for these projects, and then prepare the documents to then go out to funders and financiers. And then essentially on the funding and financing side, we would go to traditional stakeholders, non-traditional stakeholders, some other new players in the field that we're talking to, like Vancity Community Investment Bank or Tapestry Community Capital. We're actually looking at developing a social finance strategy, which we'll talk to you about a little later. And then obviously the usual grant applications. And once we're in incubation phase, the community renewal company, again, will be managed by the United Way with legal, fiduciary duty, and liability, and be the operational backbone. And the local community, through advisory committees, can provide local partnerships on the operations. So different organizations have said willingness to be partners on particular projects, and then building those local community relationships. And the outcome of all this is the projects themselves, which could also spin out into other legal entities to help spread the risk of some of these initiatives. So that is kind of the high level scope of the business model for the community renewal company, from services to impact in terms of, and also who's helping govern and operate it. And now Nick's going to kind of go through some of the specific projects that we're looking at to help describe what the CRC can do on the ground.
Yeah, great stuff. CRC, the CRC is a very exciting opportunity and potential solution to the frictions and challenges we experience in the local communities. And so one of the things that we wanted to do in the business case is to model out demonstration projects. So in a hypothetical world, what could the CRC move forward on, and what would that look like? And so we've narrated a few financial models surrounding projects, and then also comparable projects that are currently operating or being built in either the local community or just Ontario in general. So quick disclaimer, it's important to note that these projects are unaudited. They provide a high level analysis. It really serves an illustrative purpose only. And I've been always trying to find ways to make this more exciting. How can we make finance more exciting? And so instead of reading everything on the slides as the slides come forward, I'm just going to pitch to you high-level numbers. And if you are interested in more detailed financials, they are available in the business case. And if you're interested and curious about a follow-up conversation, I'm sure that United Way and our consulting team can facilitate that. On the next slide, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is our methodology to selecting projects. And so we were actually provided with 40 different land and property opportunities in both Perth and Huron regions. And in order for us to understand, what could we move forward on if the CRC decides to take on a project, we had to develop some sort of a methodology. And so we're calling that the pre-assessment tool and location matrix, both that you can find in the business case. But to give you a conceptual understanding of how we indicated which projects may have a higher probability of feasibility or a higher probability of success, we actually look at the following 6 questions. Can we get the building or land at no cost, low cost, or reasonable cost? If yes, we explore NIMBYism. Are there symptoms of NIMBYism? Not in my backyard. And if so, can we alleviate these symptoms? If yes, we go to question number 3. Do we have a general understanding of the local community needs? And do these needs match the opportunity of land or property? And if so, we ask ourselves, are community partners likely going to endorse this? And if yes, we look at the zoning. Is current zoning aligned with the project's intentions and end goal? And if it isn't, can we, at least efficiently from a cost and time perspective, rezone the property? And then the last piece is that, are we reasonably confident that there are no significant structural or environmental issues related to the property based on the information we have access to? And so we basically use this methodology as a framework to shortlist projects. In the business case, we shortlisted 8, and then we rendered more analysis to understand the financial feasibility. And from those 8, we've put together 4 demonstration projects that I'm going to present to you right now. So the first demonstration project that I am going to talk about would be located in the Goderich community. It would be an affordable housing development of roughly 18,000 square feet. Would feature 29 units, 24 1-bedroom, 5 2-bedroom units. The total capital cost would roughly be $9 million in total. And then there is a mixture of possible contributions. There is a philanthropic fundraising requirement, and then there's financing requirements. That's on the capital side. On the operational side, we think that the revenues procured by this model can match the operating expenditures. And so this model has a high probability of breaking even. To give you a comparable project, I refer to you Lakeshore Lofts, which is located in Mississauga. It's currently being constructed under management of Indwell, and they're expected to open in late 2021 at the end of this year. This particular property involves 62 1-bedroom units and 6 bachelor units, and there will be a commercial tenant on the ground floor. So the first project that I talked to you about is an affordable housing project. The second project I'm going to refer to is a supportive housing development in the Stratford community, at least hypothetically. And so this new development would feature 15 1-bedroom units. And this model requires 1.5 full-time equivalent staff to offer baseline tenant supports and tenant engagement. Now, we were looked at a high acuity model initially, And I think that we think that high acuity support should be part of this project's operational model. And to do that, high acuity support models, they have to rely on a partnership of sorts with an external either agency or body or division. Likely it could be the Ministry of Health or a local health provider to cover the annual operating deficit of this property. So high level financial overview: in order to build 15 one-bedroom units, most likely is going to cost us $4.3 million. And then there's a list of contributions that are possible. And there's also a philanthropic fundraising requirement. Whenever you provide supportive housing, at least from what I've seen and the different finances that I've access to, supportive housing models, especially high acuity support models, they do run into an operational deficit. Hence, there needs to be a partnership with an external agency or division that could provide funding to provide those supports. So the first model was affordable housing. Second model was supportive housing. A comparable example for supportive housing is Parkdale Landing in Hamilton, Ontario, owned and operated by Indwell. They opened in 2018. They have 57 studio and one-bedroom units. They provide enhanced supports, so high acuity supports, and there's ongoing financial support by the Ministry of Health. The third demonstration project I'm going to refer to is a community hub of sorts. So this one is actually not a new build as the other two projects would be. This would be retrofitting an existing space and leasing that space. It would be roughly 2,000 square feet. And the total capital cost that we've rendered just over $500,000. And we think that this model has the opportunity to break even, and it would be located in the Milverton community. To compare a community hub project that's currently up and running, we have, I think, James Thompson on the call from the New Path Foundation. I would seriously recommend you check out what they do. They're a wonderful group of human beings, and they have a very exciting community hub model. The community hub model, the way that I understand it, is called the Common Roof. They have 3 locations, Barrie, Aurelia, and Collingwood. The Collingwood example is very exciting. It's so owned and operated by the New Path Foundation. It's about around 7,500 square feet. They opened last year in April 2020 during a pandemic. So kudos to the organization for pulling it off. There was a local Rotary Club that came forward to create legacy in the community. They raised an initial $200,000. The New Path Foundation was able to put 3 partner tenants together, or partners together, that all were responsible for a $100,000 buy-in. They were able to leverage that initial fundraising and partner buy-in for a mortgage, and then the total estimated capital costs were roughly $2.2 million. And it's situated on 4 acres for potential future growth or expansion. And it's just a great model of success, and also what operational excellence looks like, in our opinion. So the first project was a affordable housing model. The second project was a supportive housing model. The third project was a community hub. And for demonstration project number 4, we're actually going to combine them. And what I mean with combine them is the community hub aspect and the affordable housing aspect. So hypothetically, in the listable community, we would build 30,000 square feet that combines a community hub and an affordable housing project. It would feature 12,000 square feet of space for the community hub, and then 30 units in total, 24 one-bedroom, 6 two-bedroom units. Total capital cost is significant. It's $16 million. Again, there's different levels of contributions that are possible, also requirements for fundraising and financing. And then we believe that this model will run a slight operational deficit. And so it could still be viable, and there will be a need for ongoing fundraising of sorts. So I'll pause there for, after this comparable project, I'll pause for a second. The project that we can compare this combined model to is KDS Cambridge. It's located in Ottawa. It was built by CADCO, which is a daughter company of Centertown Citizen Ottawa Corporation, CCOC. Currently, it's operated by King's Daughters and Sons. It's a mixed income property. It has 58 units that are studio and 1 bedroom. And then on the ground floor, there are different health providers or social service providers. The total project cost is roughly $15.6 million, and an estimated annual revenues are $312,000 per annum. So I'll pause there for 1 second, because I just spoke to you about 4 demonstration projects. What could the CRC move forward on, and how would these projects materialize in the community, and what are the impacts they could generate for the local Perth and Huron communities? now I'm going to make a slight transition to the actual financials for the CRC. So if the CRC wanted to move forward all 4 projects at the same time, what is the need for capital? And this slide is going to summarize that for you. So in terms of development capital to advance these projects forward, we need at least $2.6 million, and it's likely that that amount might be a little bit higher. There is, in terms of total contributions, so in the form of fees waived or donations, we need roughly $4.5 million. Total philanthropic fundraising requirements about $14 million. The ability to attract financing and the overall financing need is quite robust. So it's $11 million that would be required in the form of patient capital. And then the ongoing operational funding need for the supportive housing project and the community hub and affordable housing project would be roughly $114,000 per annum that needs to be found somewhere. To give you a quick summary, overview, and synopsis of the total capital required to advance not only the CRC, but its projects, the next slide will indicate what that looks like. You'll need roughly $1 million to start up the organization, and you need roughly $2.6 million for the development budget or pre-development budget. So that's $3.6 million in total. And then the long-term, so that's the money that you need now in order to not only advance the CRC, but also the 4 projects at the same time. And then the long-term financing needs based on the high-level cost estimates that we have access to would be roughly $27 million. So all in, kind of the full Monty to some degree is almost $31 million. So I'll take a quick pause there. So we just talked about demonstration projects, what they can do, what the impact may be, what the cost would be, and what the methodology would be to get there. We indicated the financial needs and resources required to move forward the CRC. One of the pieces I wanted to clarify is something we refer to as capital stacking. And so there are many different avenues and ways funding, either capital, most likely capital funding, can flow into these projects. And on the slide in front of you, we've indicated a few of those. I'll just mention a few highlights. And so capital stacking can refer to different ways that we satisfy the capital cost or capital budget on a project. And so items or segments such as a land donation or the waiving of local development charges, CMHC funding, or even HST rebates for an organization that's moving forward on these projects can help and supplement the total requirement for the capital budget. And so you want to provide some indication there. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Andre, who's going to talk about other ways to access financing in community and finding some non-traditional ways and innovative ways to potentially procure capital and to add that to the capital stacking that is required on the projects that we demonstrated to you earlier today.
Thank you, Nick. And yeah, we're coming kind of to the close of our presentation. So we'll talk about the community capital, some risks, and then some of the next steps and how you can get involved. And many of you have been part of major capital projects and understand the need to, bring in different revenue sources at different times, at different phases. And as Nick described, the full Monty, we know some of these projects will come in different phased approaches as well. And because sometimes funding is not guaranteed, we need to find other mechanisms to access the capital we need now in order to begin moving forward and start de-risking the projects. And I have background in social finance, and one of my favorite questions I would ask myself in those social finance conversations when we look at investing in community was like, what's the risk when we don't invest? And when you take that lens of what the risk is when we don't, because a lot of times we think about what the risk is when we do, what the risk is when we don't, then it allows us to think about other ways that capital can be used in our community. And so we're going to give you an example of one that was done by one of our partners called Tapestry Community Capital in partnership with an organization called the Mount Community Center. And the context of this conversation is that in the Canadian landscape, there is a movement around social finance. It's happened here provincially, it's happened across the federal government as well. And it's basically an investment that seeks a measurable social, cultural, environmental impact alongside a financial return. And sometimes may not appear different from the traditional investments, but it's really not only focused on receiving financial returns, it's financial returns and the social good. That's what makes it social finance. And organizations can acquire new assets, maintain positive cash flows, develop new self-sustaining revenue streams that can help diversify that capital stack that Nick was mentioning. And overall in Canada, there's a growing market for these type of investment vehicles. And we are recommending as well that the CRC look at creating an investment vehicle like this for the Perth and Huron community on maybe a project specific basis or for the CRC as a whole, which is yet to be determined. Now, this particular case study is about the the Mount Community Center, which purchased a property and made plans for how to use it, including the creation of affordable housing, a food center, a co-working space for community organizations, and community rooms for health and social services, arts, culture, and recreational activities. So really great model. And it spent all of its capital to purchase the property and did not have enough capital to redevelop the space. So this provided an opportunity for the Mount to turn to its greatest asset, its community. The Mount attracted local community investors through an issuance of something called the community bond, which is a social vehicle that has helped many local community real estate projects move forward across Ontario. And Nick and I have been part of some of those as well. The investors can provide from $1,000 to $100,000 in investment. They receive annual interest payments, in this case 3%, which was competitive to the market rates, and over the course of a 5-year term. And at the end of the 5-year term, when the investment matures, the principal is paid back. And the Mount has the option to reissue a new bond, where some investors will renew, will attract some new investors, and based on the financial model, their debt load might shift. And the community in Peterborough, where the Mount is located, within 7 months, 67 individuals and organizations invested $2 million. And this capital, alongside the grants and other low interest loans, the community center was able to build 43 units, affordable housing units, provide the social, recreational, therapeutic programming. And at the time of the purchase, the Mount's property was valued at 5.2. Today it's worth 10 million. And they were able to put in additional affordable housing units. Now they're up to 71. And so you can see here that nonprofit organizations can leverage the community bond model to provide an interest-bearing loan into community, because there's an exemption to do that for nonprofit organizations. And this case study illustrates two outcomes: that there's capital in local community that you're able to leverage for a mission-driven project that has stuck due to limited economic opportunity from traditional sources, and that the capital stays within the community, and the local organizations managing the project now owns an asset that can be leveraged for future community projects. So that's why we see this as a great opportunity for Perth and Huron as well. So some of the risk associated with this whole thing, and there's a lot of text on the slide there, but just for purposes later that you can see this, but there are many risks with incubating and going through the whole operational process. And we've kind of indicated some mitigation strategies. The couple that we can identify is the fifth one, which says too many projects and too much unpredictability to focus on. And so that allows us to be focused on ensuring quality over quantity and making educated bets on high probability projects. We could look at unable to rally enough community support for some of these projects. And so we need to really keep an eye on this model and see if it's working, what's not working, and looking at making sure that this is not too bureaucratic of a process, and making sure we have good facilitation of community partners and good dialogue between local stakeholders and the contractors that are involved. So we see this as risk that can be mitigated, but risk also if we don't act. And to close it off with our kind of next steps and recommendations, we've gone through the journey with United Way to look at the feasibility study, which we completed. The business case is now completed. There's an approved budget for consultants and staffing by the United Way for the next year. And the United Way has agreed to become the incubating organization. Now we begin the startup phase, and that includes developing advisory committees, hiring someone to take a staff lead role with the CRC, selecting our first project to work on, raising community capital, and procuring funding from our traditional sources like grants and financing. So that is the CRC. We thank you so much for giving us the time to share back what we've learned along the way, what we've pulled together with the feedback of the community and the leadership of the United Way, and where it stands now and how it's going to move forward. And before I pass it back to Ryan, we did want to offer some opportunities for you to think about ways that you can stay involved, because some of you have already been involved, and continue to stay involved in the future. So connect with the United Way team to present this idea to your organization, to your community, or to a project that you're working on, to support an advisory committee that you're maybe already on, or developing one for a particular project that you want to work on, to help identify land and properties that can help to develop the housing and social service hubs that we want to develop in our community. And there's going to be a job posting that goes out in the future to help hire someone to take some leadership role with the CRC and helping us find the right leader. So with that, we thank you for your time and attention. And Ryan, we'd love to pass it back to you to begin any discussion.
All right, thanks guys so much. Really appreciate the thorough presentation. Just a couple of things before I turn it over to question and answer. I want to offer a thank you to our friends at the Community Foundation. Heidi, I think, is on the call. She was participating in conversations all the way through. You saw her in that one picture, but in particular, they helped to fund this particular study through the Investment Readiness Fund through her partner with the KW Community Foundation. So thank you, Heidi, for that assistance as well. We certainly are interested to hear feedback at this point, to answer questions about the project as we understand it today, recognizing that there's lots to learn, lots to grow with, lots to understand as we move forward. But I do think this is an exciting opportunity. So feel free to use the chat feature to write your question out, or you can just raise your hand using that signal feature, and we'd be happy to give you the floor so that we can answer your questions at this point in time. Nick and Andre are a wealth of knowledge, and I'll do my best to work alongside them to answer any questions that people may have.
Ryan, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can, Martin, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan, for spearheading this, and certainly a big thank you to Heidi and the Community Foundation for funding this study. And thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation this morning. Certainly, and I speak on my behalf, certainly I'm Deputy Mayor in Stratford, but I'm certainly excited about what I see here. And this is my personal opinion. We know that there is a great need in our community for projects that you have put forward here this morning. Just outstanding, and I love the discussion of partnerships. We know that great things can happen if we have partners formalized and partnerships formalized and work together. I do have a question though, if I may. Just and there was a number of questions I wrote down, but they were answered as we went along. But a question around: has there been projects of this nature in other communities that possibly have been attempted and maybe not been successful to the degree that they wished? And is there anything we can learn from them?
Thank you for the question, Martin. I wonder, Andre or Nick, if you guys would like to just share a little bit of information about New Dawn. I think it's relevant to Martin's question.
Yeah, so New Dawn is in Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, and it was started by some folks connected to the university and the Antigonish movement that they had out there a while ago. And it was really about, kind of people in the community taking kind of some ownership over some of the community challenges. And I recognize your deputy mayor in the context of that community, the municipality wasn't as supportive of some of the ideas that were being put forward. And so they were actually successful in raising some capital through the CMHC, and they developed their own entity called the New Dawn. And they called it a community development corporation at the time, and they would claim to be one of the first community economic development initiatives in Canada. But in that journey for them, they had a lot of setbacks because there was some lack of community support in terms of, aligning with the leadership in the municipal council there, accessing the funding through the municipality with land and other operational funding. And so they had to really go to other sources outside of that kind of municipal support to do the work. We actually saw a model in Edmonton as well, just to give some contrast, that actually had the support from the municipality, had support from the local community foundation, and they actually incubated their initiative within the local community foundation. And so to your point, each community is kind of dealing with these situations slightly different. And that's why we presented some of the conditions, because it really is about the right conditions, not necessarily the right entry point to the model like this, because everyone's kind of starting at a different way depending on the local context. In terms of failures, I mean, I guess people don't talk a lot about their failures as much as they talk about their successes when we looked at these type of models. But I do know that in each of these scenarios, there was sometimes challenges in terms of the duration of the project. So wanting to get things done faster and a certain urgency. And there's some delays because, a certain partner is not on board, or a certain property falls through, and there's or certain problem with an environmental assessment comes up. So there's a lot of troubleshooting that needs to get done in each of these situations, which I'm sure everyone here is kind of familiar with. But in terms of a concrete, like this got up and running and there's a concrete failure. I don't know if I have one from a CDC perspective, but the first project Nick and I worked on was a social enterprise called the Old East Village Grocer in London. And there was the first investment that we did at Verge Capital in London, and Nick and I were collaborators on that. And 5 years later, they were not breaking even, they were subsidized. They were helping people with disabilities gain access to training and employment within a grocery setting. And they didn't want to just farm out people to the grocery stores after the training in-house. They want to actually operate a grocery store themselves. And they saw a model outside of their jurisdiction that seemed feasible. They brought it into the local community. They operated for 5 years. And during the pandemic, they closed it, because it was no longer financially viable for them, given all the other pressures they were facing. So there is risk to these things. Nothing is a sure bet. We can't always predict the market conditions, but we have seen a lot of success with the Community Development Corporation model in a variety of cities in Canada and as well in the US.
If I may, a follow-up, Ryan?
Yep, sure, Martin.
Thank you. And once again, this is my opinion, my thoughts. It certainly hasn't been vetted through council whatsoever, but certainly I can easily say from my perspective, I'm an advocate for what you're proposing here. So going back to that piece in the capital stacking concept, and you had indicated that in the Nova Scotia case, perhaps the municipality didn't support significantly. In your success stories, what did the municipality bring to the table that was the most, from their perspective, the most important ingredient from the municipality perspective? And
it's a great question. Andre, do you want to tackle that one again, or?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if Nick wanted to take on the question at all.
He's giving you the go.
He's giving me the go. Okay, so there's a lot of diversity in the roles the municipality plays. I can't say there's one role, one pathway. What we have seen in the Edmonton case was the provision of land was huge. And I think if you see from a financial model, accessing land makes a huge difference in terms of getting a project off and running. And we have seen in the municipality context, the ability to actually put in funding, operational funding to kickstart as well. I think in the Edmonton case, there was a bit of a loan guarantee that the municipality was able to provide that was able then to be leveraged by the community foundation and other financing arms to then kind of kickstart the financial model of the projects. So there's, and just the usual stuff, I'm sure Ryan can add to this, but the municipal partnerships we've seen municipal stakeholders be part of these conversations already, just the willingness to work with a CRC to find the right balance and partnership. So not stepping on each other's toes, because sometimes there's already initiatives that the municipality is involved in that, the CRC could be like, trying to find the right roles within those initiatives, and also feeling like it's supporting municipal strategic objectives, right? Because there are objectives that are being put forward in the municipality, and so making sure those things are in alignment.
And just to add one or two more pieces to that, Martin, I think apart from the provision of land, and I believe it was over $10 million of land value that was donated to the CDC in Edmonton in order to advance these particular projects. And apart from that, it was ongoing operational funding that was a big support from the municipality. But when we interviewed the CEO, Mark, he said that the capital that allows for pre-development or development and to move land or property opportunities forward in the spectrum or continuum of due diligence and assessment was the most vital part to actually activate these type of projects. And so I think that's where there's obviously land donations, there's some financial contributions. I'm sure that there were contributions on the local level, such as waiving development charges or waiving any fees related to applications for building permits, etc. But the main thing that Mark stipulated was this access to pre-development dollars that actually allowed momentum to get behind these projects and move them forward, and also test their due diligence. And some projects were successful and they've been able to build some wonderful projects, and some projects early on were rendered unfeasible, which was also important for them to know as they wanted to advance projects. So I hope that answers your question, Martin.
And can I add one thing, James? I know James is here. Hey, James. I know I put you on the spot here. I was wondering if, from your examples, the community hubs that you've worked on, are there any other anecdotes you'd add from a municipality point of view that contributed to the success of the hubs in the jurisdictions you worked in?
Unfortunately for us, all of the municipalities were not involved in any of our project development pieces. The only support that we received was when we were working on the Aurelia build, and that was a tax-free loan. I think it was to go against the initial property taxes that we had to pay for the first couple of years. We ended up having to pay that back, obviously, at some point in time, but that was really about it. Our learnings from all of this moving forward is definitely to include the municipality at the front end of the conversation, to treat them as a potential collaborative partner, as opposed to just sending out information and keeping them informed through that loop. So it's really important to have them as a front end piece of any discussion, and then see what happens. Because as you've rightfully said, every municipality and regional government acts very differently in terms of how to support these types of projects. So, having them involved in that front end discussion is key.
Thank you. And if I may, just a last follow-up question, comments, Ryan. And I think, Andre, you mentioned this, but are you able to, and I like your take on this, as opposed to risk of doing it, what's the risk of not doing it? Are you able to quantify that? Because I truly believe there is a large risk of not doing something. Are you able to quantify that as you make presentations, perhaps further down the road, to other partnerships, other partners, including perhaps the municipality? Are you able to quantify that in any way, so that people can say, yeah, that makes sense?
Martin, I'll lean into this and I'll pass it on to Ryan if I've missed anything or if he wants to add. Certainly we can. I think there are different ways to indicate what communities can look like if we don't act and move forward on mitigating potential tensions or challenges, whether they're at the systems level or whether they are at the local level experienced by residents on a day-to-day. Andre and I are very fortunate to work in many different communities, kind of ranging from Simcoe County to recently the city of Brampton. In kind of like another part of my professional career, I work in other communities ranging from Mississauga to Chatham, pertaining housing in particular. And so we get to experience the trends and data that exist in many different communities. And if you look at communities that perhaps have waited or were not able to accelerate solutions, especially to the housing ecosystem, the consequences are enormous. And so waiting times that get into social housing that are 7 to 15 years, wait lists of 15,000 plus households, but then also just the challenges experienced in that pertain to household income and being able to satisfy rent payments, mental health challenges related to that. I mean, there's all these different ways that we can indicate the likeliness of things moving in a certain direction, and then what the impacts of that would be. Now, from a municipal point of view, what might be helpful is to understand the costs related to that. And so there are infrastructure costs related to the impacts of not moving forward and mitigating the housing crisis and the crisis related to mental health, as we put it forward in the presentation. So I don't have access to these numbers now. I wish I had access to these numbers. And if this is something that is an aspiration, I'm sure that we can put something together that provides strong and fact-based argumentation. Ryan, if I've missed anything, feel free to lean in.
Oh, thanks, Nick. I think that's helpful. I mean, there certainly are quantitative indicators out there of the problem that we're facing, and I think those can be used to explain the situation. It might be a little bit hard to say what the numbers might be in the future, but if you did a bit of forecasting without any kind of solution, you may be able to do it, right? You could say this is our by name list right now for homelessness. This is our wait list for housing. I don't know, any number of indicators that municipalities currently use, and we could say perhaps it looks like this down the road if we're not able to do some of the things that we're looking at doing. So that's an interesting way of looking at it. I want to build on Martin's questions and comments and thank Joan, the CAO of the City of Stratford, for asking a question in the chat box, wondering what is the role for municipalities and the CMSM in this project. And so I'll mention, to reiterate, of course, Joan, you heard all the responses to Martin's questions. Some of those reflect on the roles that municipalities can play We also are interested to understand, what partnership might look like on an individual project basis. So I think there's a way of looking at the whole project and how we can work together on the upper level of trying to launch something like this. But probably more specific right now in my mind is if we were to begin to work on a project in any one of the regions that are represented on this call, what kind of partnership could we strike there to make it possible? And I think the social services manager would certainly have a role in that, because for example, if everyone would agree that the greatest need is to build supportive housing in any one community here, that is territory that they are currently working in, right? And so you'd have to have agreement and partnership at the outset that this is the right way to attack such a proposal. There's always lots of players that have connection to these projects, and so we want to honor those relationships and honor those things and make sure on a project basis we would agree to what that partnership might look like. But in particular, I think in early days, what we're really thinking about honestly is can we identify locations and secure land, and perhaps have an agreement that development fees might be waived if we could move ahead with some of these other ways of managing projects. So we saw the capital stacking. We think that there's possibilities with drawing revenue from a number of different places to get projects built of various shapes and sizes. And so if we knew that municipalities were interested, in moving ahead with those kinds of conversations, that would really be a beginning point in our minds to try to take care of that as we go along. So Joan, do you have any follow-up questions with that?
Certainly, thank you, Ryan. So I was just going to mention there was a recent presentation to Stratford City Council by Invest Stratford of the housing toolkit that they put together, and there's a number of tools in there, and that was well received by council. There is a lot of work that's going to be needed by the city to put that in place, including a community improvement plan. But it did talk about similar things about fees, waiving of certain fees, and things like that to invest in these projects. So I just wanted you to be aware that toolkit is out there. We're working on it, but it is a big project to put these tools in, and maybe that makes it more interesting for companies and developers to be actively involved in contributing to more affordable, more attainable, and even supportive housing, which again requires the Ministry of Health involvement with supportive
Absolutely.
housing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you saw the operational deficit in one of the projects, right? Those projects don't get off the ground without that kind of support from the Ministry of Health, for sure. So yeah, I'm well aware of the report, and certainly was keen to listen to council's discussion on that issue at your recent meeting. And I think there's interesting potential partnerships, as we walk along with this particular project, how that coalesces with it. The spectrum of housing, of course, Joan, because your particular project was focused on attainable housing. We want to make sure that we're all, perhaps running in lanes that make sense. And I'm not sure whether the community renewal company will ever get into building what you've described as attainable housing, or Invest Stratford described as attainable housing, or not. I don't know. We haven't really got to that. We're probably looking more at the other end of the spectrum to try to help the people that we typically work with. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't make sense to somehow have a larger project, maybe with different partners that included a number of different types of housing.
Yeah, which sort of leads me into my sort of where our next question is. The municipalities in Perth County have recently released the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And again, one of the major objectives in there deals specifically with affordable housing. So again, we have a framework in place that we are starting to roll out with respect to meeting those objectives and goals for affordable housing. So.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, one of the unique things about our time is that just about everyone is identifying affordable housing, attainable housing as a critical issue for for their organizations, for their regions. And so I think it's fairly easy to see how something like this, if it was successful, can help many of us achieve the goals that we're set out to do, whether it's at the municipal level or at the partnership level with different organizations. So I appreciate that there's lots of synergy there in terms of the need. I noticed that Cyril has his hand up. Cyril, do you want to jump in?
Certainly. Thanks, Ryan. And thanks, Andre and Nick, for your wonderful presentation. My question is this, Nick, I was listening carefully at the beginning. I mean, one obviously critical component to make project like this reality is financing. And you touch us what you were, kind of calling traditional, from fundraising, grant subsidies, donations, and so on and so forth, prior to taking it to financial institution, complete through a loan or whatever. But you've also mentioned way of being other creative way of making this a reality that also helps to make the financing sustainable. And then that's where I think it's probably Andrew that touched a concept of a community bond, from some other places. Nick, you mentioned something about a for-profit businesses that could also be used in order to help there. Can you guys elaborate just on that aspect? Did you guys dig a little bit further? What it could be like, what kind of shape it could take, what kind of type of businesses? Would they be located at the same place where the project is? Can you guys kind of unpack that a little bit further? Because that touch a little bit more into the realm of where I feel like I could contribute more on something like that. So I want to hear you guys a little bit more on that aspect.
For sure, I'll lead in, and let's see if Andre or Ryan wants to fill anything else. What makes a community renewal company so exciting for us is that there's an opportunity to become innovative, or even more innovative, to pull in and attract capital from community and other sources. And so oftentimes when communities have a hard time mobilizing capital, whether through granting routes, either federal government, provincial government, local municipalities, and we want to start looking at utilizing its social capital or just other forms of community capital. And so we've came across many different examples, but also in our work, over the last decade. So I will mention one example, and then maybe Andre can build on the community bond that Innovation Works did and Pillar did as another example. So community bond is something that Andre just mentioned, right? So issuing an investment vehicle through a nonprofit in order to provide an investment opportunity to a range of demographics related to a range of different investment buy-ins, so from $1,000 to $100,000. So that's one way of finding and attracting capital in a different way. When we looked at the Edmonton CDC example, there was another opportunity that came forward, and that opportunity is called an opportunity co-op. And so to set a little bit of context, there is one particular plaza in Edmonton that experiences, in that particular neighborhood, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and community residents came together with the aspiration to purchase the property. And they said the values that we have as a community are not emulated or aligned with what's going on in that plaza. So let's see if we can buy this. And I think the plaza was roughly 20,000 square feet, if memory serves correctly. And so the community residents, they went to a local bank. They were not able to move that project forward. And so this is where the CDC, the equivalent of a CRC, stepped in as kind of like a backboning organization. They provided due diligence, they provided financial models, connections to a local bank. And what they did together is basically create a new organization called an opportunity co-op, and they structured an investment vehicle in that co-op as well. And so 91 people came forward. You could invest $5,000, I believe, all the way up to $100,000. 91 investors came forward, majority of them being community residents, and they raised $1.1 million. And I believe, don't hold me to this, in a time frame of 2 months. And so with that initial investment of $1.1 million, they were able to leverage long-term capital through a traditional lender or bank. And then they own the actual property. Every investor gets one vote. And so now there's basically a board that runs the property, and they're looking at retrofitting the property and attracting tenants that align with the values of the organization. So community bonds or opportunity co-ops are different ways that we can attract capital that potentially has a hard time being cultivated through traditional aspects. Now, Cyril, in pertaining to your question around businesses, I wasn't quite sure what you meant, but here's what I'm assuming you meant. Part of the revenue structure, the operating on the operational side of these projects, sometimes the first floor of these buildings can offer space to commercial tenants. And so in the demonstration project, we saw a food bank coming in. And so that also presents another opportunity to create more sustainability in these projects by inviting businesses or commercial tenants in, and for us to procure revenue on the operational side that way. If I've missed anything, Cyril, please let me know, because I want to make sure I answer your question right.
That's exactly what I had in mind. I probably didn't express myself properly, but that was it. The idea of you could bring what I call traditional businesses using some of the space and utilizing the revenue generated by those businesses to help, obviously, with along with the financing. So thank you.
And Cyril, just to share, like there are so many, there's a lot of models like this out there in the world. Like just so you know, like we're not talking just theories and concepts here. We're actually looking at real situations in different communities. So like, for example, at Pillar in Innovation Works, you have to imagine when I started there, it was like 7 people, $20,000 surplus, and they want to buy a $2 million, $3 million building, right? And you can't access financing. Actually, someone had to put in a $200,000 hypothecation, or like basically a collateral, in order to access a traditional mortgage. And we still didn't have enough money for all the renovations. And we did the typical grants, sponsorship, even a crowdfunding campaign. And we had to do the community bond to raise 1 million just to get the renovations off the ground. And on the 32,000 square foot, 4-story building, we couldn't even lease the entire 4 floors. So our 4th floor was commercially leased, was not a mission-aligned organization. So we were trying to find the right business model to make it all work. In New Dawn and Cape Breton, they operate businesses in home care that they reinvest the revenues back into their organization to subsidize other activities. So that's kind of that social enterprise with a profit model that gets reinvested. The opportunity co-op that Nick mentioned in Waterloo, they have the Union Sustainable Development Cooperative. They raise equity to then buy a building that was developed through affordable housing mandate. The developer's lease was coming up and was going to be sold back into the private market. They were able to raise money through equity investments and intervene into the market, capture that building, hold on to those below market rate rents, and now are subleasing it to local community social service providers. And in 6 Nations, Indigenous community, they have wonderful models too. Some of their businesses are actually owned by the community. So they have an economic development corporation that actually started businesses. They actually operate the business for profit, and they took a portion of their profits and reinvested it into affordable housing, which they then use to get shovels in the ground and access CMHC funding. These models are everywhere. And there's a market that's growing in Canada right now. So Nick and I were on another project, and we just met with the Van City Community Investment Bank, and they actually have a whole portfolio called social impact real estate. So there's actually banks, financial institutions that understand this now, these concepts of social impact real estate, not just traditionally financing these projects. So I just want to share these examples with you quickly, just to share that these models, this business models, these financial models are happening. There's a growing market to support them. And if Perth-Huron in this CRC and partners are well positioned, we can access these opportunities.
And Ryan, if you can quickly allow me to, because I know there's others obviously and have questions there, and put a bow on what Andrea just said. I truly believe there is an untapped resource out there from individuals that are sitting on a tremendous amount of asset, and I'm talking in cash, that currently, they're being very responsible in terms of their retirement. And so it's going to be sitting there for a while, but actually what it could do, it's change other people's lives. And so if you provide a vehicle by which people are being able to utilize that in a way where they're making a difference and then still be completely reassured and be safe in terms of what that asset is going to be at the end, I think it's all about developing what that vehicle is, making it safe, making in a way people could trust. And you guys have no idea. Honestly, I don't think we have no idea what could come out of that. I believe there's a tremendous untapped opportunity right there. I just wanted to highlight that. Thanks again, fellas. Appreciate it.
And my favorite quote, this is probably excited. My favorite quote, there's an insurance broker, she owns an insurance brokerage. She invested in the Innovation Works, and she said, imagine insurance brokers, they invest in capital markets, and they do this kind of investing. She said, this is the first investment that I can drive by and see its impact. So giving the opportunity to actually drive by your investments to see what your money at work is really a special feeling.
Great. All right. I noticed that Kim has raised her hand. Kim.
Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. You've just brought to highlight that there's numerous organizations out there. I'm wondering if you can explain to me the benefits of starting our own or developing our own CDC versus partnering with one that is already existing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that was the whole premise of this study. And we did in our working group, in our feasibility study, we brought together people talk about this. And in those discussions, we had the conversation about who is on the ground right now that can be part of this. And no one necessarily put their hand up and said, hey, we want to take on this particular approach. And I think Ryan said it at the beginning, it's like the competencies to then take on these risks of financing and developing these projects. And we heard in anecdotal stories that there was attempts to attract other developers. I was on actually an email thread yesterday with Ryan with another, maybe you could call it social impact, really affordable housing developer, who said they're at capacity right now. They can't even come into the community because they have other projects on the go in other communities. So even those that are potentially the right fit are not even able to come into this community right now because they have other projects on the go. So it's not as easy as just attracting external partners locally. We've had many conversations. No one has indicated that they wanted to take on this type of approach. So if anyone here does, then we'd love to hear that. And additionally, it's creating that local capacity, because what happens is when you bring external partners in, they leave with that expertise. And one of the stakeholders we had in this in our focus, in our working group, was someone from the community who developed a real estate organization, a for-profit real estate organization, who was doing real estate projects outside of Perth-Huron, and came into this conversation and said, hey, you know what? I've done so much work. I've done so much incredible work. And actually, I can now apply that in the Perth-Huron region, but I've never been given an opportunity to actually do construction here locally. And now they want to get involved in the CRC. So there will be people actually involved in this project as operational partnerships. But in that diagram, we did write operational partnerships because we don't intend the CRC to have to do everything under the sun. And that was clear in the focus groups as well. Some folks here are part of organizations that do the housing development and do real estate development, and said, hey, don't think you're going to do it all. You know, you're going to probably hire lead consultants or lead project managers that are going to subcontract different individuals in that development phase. So there's a lot of relationships that will be nurtured in order to get the CRC off the ground. But what I think is critical is someone willing to take the risk on doing all this creative solutions around financing, taking the risk around moving projects forward, convening the right stakeholders to get things off the ground. And that should all be complementary to what's already happening in the community. So we didn't find anyone that fit that mold per se, but we do recognize that it will be done in partnership with a lot of other people.
Thank you.
And I noticed that our friend Brian Elliott is on the line, and you know, I can see somewhere along the road where the CRC is partnering with Habitat for Humanity in some way, shape, or form, you know, to pull a project off. And he maybe doesn't want to nod to that publicly, but I'm going to say that it's a possibility. So, you know, I think what we really need is someone to drive forward on projects. And as you drive forward on a project, you're going to be able to clearly delineate who the right partners are. And, you know, is it somebody else that's going to operate? Is it somebody else that's going to build? Is it somebody else that's going to do any number of the aspects that we're talking about that bring a project from concept to completion? It doesn't always have to be this new thing that we're creating. We just need somebody that's going to push it forward and try to get us on the right track. And I think those operational aspects will emerge per project. You know, it'll be different every time is my expectation. But yeah, we need the competency to get things moving and get started and to move through the development process in partnership with others, in my opinion. Any other questions? I know Mayor George Finch was on the call here. I see that he's still here. I just wanted to say that in the 8 projects, there's one imagined at Exeter too, just so you know. Questions, comments, thoughts? Anyone know of somebody that has a few $1 million, wants to get this thing started with me? Be happy to entertain those conversations.
Don't worry, Ryan, there's money out there.
Yeah, there you go. All right, I'm not going to worry. We will find it for sure. That usually actually is not the greatest. Funds will follow vision, as the saying goes.
Ryan, I was wondering, maybe as people are still pausing on some questions, if anyone that was part of the working group that would maybe want to chime in and just provide some thoughts. I see Heidi's here, Brian, maybe Shannon. There's a couple of people here that were part of this process. That Jeff, right, that maybe want to comment on this as well.
Feel free,
because there was a lot of diversity of perspectives, not just the ones that Nick and I are sharing. I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Brian was never shy to pick up the mic, so yes.
Hi. So first of all, great presentation, gentlemen, and Ryan, I think you hit the nail on the head in some of your comments that this is early stages. There's lots of room for partners and that to become involved in different stages, and our experience is project specific will help drive how those partnerships and interactions will be there. And I think it's a great first step, especially in the rental community. And it is tough to attract developers. Our build schedules are literally, 12, 18, 24 months out in certain cases. So having a third-party group like this to help coordinate that and help find developers or builders inside those gaps is important. So really good work.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks. I'm also noting that Don is on the call too. And then even Ryan, Mike is on the call too, the chair of the United Way board. So that even if, from a board perspective, commenting on why, that was approved to take on, there's so many great people here that have been part of this conversation. So we'd love to hear some other voices.
Thank you. Yeah.
So as the chair of the board for United Way, I can tell you that we had a very fulsome discussion after the presentation that Nick and Andre provided to the board. There was, I guess, due diligence is the right word in terms of asking questions about what the risk was. And certainly there's a clear understanding of the need for all of our communities in Huron and Perth. But it was a unanimous decision at the end of that discussion that we move forward with this project and proceed with phase one, because the need is so great in our communities. And it goes back to that whole housing first philosophy. If we can get people housing and safe and affordable housing, then we can begin to deal with the other issues that exist in our community. But if we don't have the housing for those folks, it's an uphill battle that we'll probably never win. So this is extremely important for the United Way, and the board is 100% behind it.
I'll just add to Mike's comments. It also solves a problem that we've been looking at for a long time. So you've heard a lot about housing, and that is a significant thing, but we have been trying to improve access to services throughout our rural region for a long time too, as Nick mentioned in the early part. And how do you build a community hub? For example, that was shown there. Our organization didn't have the competency to do that, but we felt like it was the right thing to move ahead. And so this also solves that problem for us in a real tangible way, that we could be a partner, or the CRC could be a partner of choice to try to move those kinds of projects ahead that have been identified as great needs in certain communities in certain areas across our region. So that was part of the discussion as well. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, it's Howard here. I was on the working group, and I found it fascinating that even though in Zoom calls we were I was feeling like a palpable sense of energy amongst the people, and then as part of the process we identified that okay, well, there's this gap exists because there's really no one out there that needs to be the catalyst, and so why shouldn't we be the catalyst? And it's a phenomenal idea, tough to get it going, but it has to be somebody that has to get it going, and that's what this is all about. It's great. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Howard.
Thanks, and Shannon's put her hand up now too.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. And again, thanks, Ryan and Andre and Nick. I so appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I think it's a fabulous, I'm so excited to hear that the board has, pushed this forward for the first stage. I'm so excited about that. And I think it's really important. I know I do a lot of work for Health Canada and HSO right now in terms of integrated care, and just the fact that there's so many people sitting across so many sectors right now working together and pulling together, that is so key. And I commend all of you for wanting to be part of this. And I just going back to part of the presentation, I think it's so important what you were talking about, and I don't know if it was Andre or Nick, about the criteria that you have set up for those projects. Those are very clear criteria. I think it's really important that there's some strength and some measurement there to be able to look at the importance of the projects. That's perfect. So I'm so excited that this is going through. And I'm just so happy that this is moving on to the next stage. So thank you. I think it's great just to see so many great collaborations right now. So well done.
Thank you, Shannon. Any other comments or questions? The next steps were shown to you at the end of the presentation. I'll just reiterate that we will be looking to hire someone in the near future who will work for the United Way, and that that individual that we're seeking for is going to need quite a combination of skills, so we would appreciate your support as we move ahead with trying to find someone to lead the next steps here, beginning sometime probably in September. And that person would obviously need to have some kind of skills, understanding, knowledge of capital development, but also we are looking for the kind of person that can navigate community relationships, can be understanding of community challenges, and can work together collaboratively with many partners across the region. So when you see a posting sent out to you, I would appreciate if you would help us to find just the right person to lead forward. So that's where we're at. We're committed to, the board is committed to that for the remainder of its fiscal year. And the longer term in terms of how to finance this isn't 100% clear. You know how it is with starting new ventures. You don't always have all the answers, but we do anticipate moving ahead with some of the projects as best we can, as quick as we can in the next number of months.
Ryan, if I can just add one comment to, as we're looking for this individual to lead the CRC and its initiatives, Andre and myself, very likely, and also Pilar as an organization, will be involved and come alongside this individual and United Way as a group and provide due diligence around financial modeling, probably some funding procurement or grant writing of sorts. And so it's not an individual that has to lead it by him or herself, but also we'll find significant support from Andre and I and other parts of our community. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. That is part of the plan for sure, to make sure that we get the best launch possible. We're going to continue to work with Nick and Andre over the next number of months to ensure that there is a strong launch, a strong transfer of skills and understanding and knowledge that we have gained during this feasibility phase. All right, well, I won't hold you any longer if that's the discussion for today. I can appreciate that we all have many things to do. Grateful that you did spend 90 minutes with us today as we seek to launch this exciting project. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, something you're mulling over saying, hey, that didn't smell right, or hey, I want to offer you this insight, this opportunity, the dialogue is always open. The door is open to talk. We're in this together to try to help our community as best we can. So with that said, I want to express my thanks again for your time and attention, and hope to see you very, 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 very soon in person next time. What do you say? Take care, everybody.